Hi, everybody. This is just a quick mini lecture about Jean Piaget, sort of to supplement what is in your book. Your book doesn't go into a whole lot of detail about some of his main ideas. I want to do this to kind of highlight a few points. So Piaget was a cognitive developmental psychologist, considered one of the top three psychologists in the history of psychology. And here is a quote that illustrates sort of his beliefs. A student who achieves knowledge through free investigation and spontaneous effort will be able to retain that knowledge and will have acquired a methodology that can serve for a lifetime. In other words, kids construct meaning for themselves through their own exploration, not by being told meaning. And this is the foundation of what's known as constructivism, constructing your own knowledge. And Piaget was the foremost constructivist. Quick biographical information just to make you feel like an inadequate human being. He published his first article when he was 10 years old. It was an observation of the albino sparrow. And by 21, he'd published over 20 articles. He was offered a job as the curator of a museum when he was still in high school. The curator of a museum has to know everything about everything that's in the museum. It's a huge job. He turned it down so he could finish high school, and he got his PhD by the time he was 21. Now notice, his PhD was in animal biology. So he's a biologist by training. Then he got a job in the Binet lab in Paris. Binet was part of the Stanford Binet IQ test. So what he was doing was looking at test questions and was really interested in why people got the answers wrong, what that revealed about their thinking. He had 3 children, studied all of them intensively. Little known fact, his wife actually did a lot of the observations, but she doesn't get any of the credit. Okay, that's it for the bio. Here's assumptions of his theory. 1, a person has hereditary organic reactions. That's the biologist in him, that we are hardwired to have certain sort of predispositions and reactions. The individual is naturally active. This means that children want to understand their environments. It's part of adapting to the environment. It is an evolutionary principle. Children are born without mind. This is the idea that they don't really come into the world with a lot of knowledge, and they construct knowledge through their experience. And this process of constructing knowledge through experience is required to adapt to and survive in the environment. So again, a biological predisposition. He thought that the way that we adapt is by taking information in from the environment, from our experience, and organizing that information into mental structures that he called schemas. So you might have a schema for dogs, you might have a schema for food, you might have a schema for home, and these are all ways, schemas that organize information into different sort of areas. The name for his view of development was genetic epistemology, and there's sort of 2 parts. Human development is an interaction between biology and the environment. So it's not just that you develop because your brain grows, the biology side, and it's not that all of your development is determined by your experience, that's the environment side. It's how these 2 things interact. The quest for knowledge is biologically founded. We are predisposed to understand our environment. You don't have to give people incentives and rewards to get them to learn. You just have to confuse them, give them cognitive conflict, and they will naturally want to figure it out. So he thought biological and environmental factors combined to contribute to cognitive development and behavior, and that the individual is an active agent, is working hard to understand their environment and to construct meaning from their experience. 2 things that influence how and whether environmental knowledge, whether experience leads to learning, are your genetic predisposition, how much can you learn at a time, what is your stage of development biologically, how much big is your capacity for learning and maintaining information, and then disequilibrium. You are going to be motivated to learn when disequilibrium exists. For example, if you think that if your schema for dog is German Shepherd because that's what your family has, and then you are introduced to a poodle and someone tells you that's a dog too, you're going to experience a moment of confusion known as disequilibrium because the poodle doesn't fit into your dog schema. That's going to lead you to actively work to reconcile this new information, and you will expand your dog schema to now include poodles as well. So getting new information that doesn't exist in your schema already creates disequilibrium, causes you to find a way, to search for a way to integrate that new information. That's how he thought it worked. So assumptions of his theory: people are active learners who construct meaning and knowledge for themselves. We seek cognitive equilibrium. That means when we are confused, we actively try to find an answer to the confusion and get us back to equilibrium. And there's a need for harmony between sensory information and accumulated knowledge. So this comes from the biological concept of homeostasis. Homeostasis means that you want to be in a state of balance. And when you're out of balance, you seek to get back into balance. When you're thirsty, you try and find something to drink. The thirst is disequilibrium. And getting something to drink will get you back into homeostasis, back into a state of balance. That's what cognitive equilibrium is as well. You take in sensory information and you try and make it fit with what you already know, and that is the process of trying to get back to a state of equilibrium. Okay, the process of organizing new information into existing schemas is known as the process of equilibration, maintaining equilibrium. Let's see. Individuals adapt to their environment by organizing information through assimilation and accommodation. So here's how it works. Excuse me. You got a schema for something. You encounter new information in the environment that doesn't fit with your schema. You have to find a way to assimilate that new information into your existing schema. When you take in that new information, the poodle is a dog as well, you have to alter your schema to make that new information fit, and that's known as accommodation. The other thing that's going on in his theory is the developmental stages. And this is covered in the book, but I'm going to race through it real quick in this brief video. So he thought that cognitive development occurred in stages. These stages are by and large biologically determined. You can't race through them. They are a function of your biological maturation. And the first stage, sensory motor stage, is generally equivalent to infancy. First couple of years, your thought processes, your thinking processes, your memory is not really very well developed. So most of your understanding comes to you through your motor activities and your senses. Pre-operational stage is the next stage, and this is generally equivalent to the preschool years. You're able to hold more information in your mind, to remember things, but you aren't really able to actively manipulate the information that is in your mind. So you tend to think about stuff as it was presented to you. So the operation, when in Piaget's theory, operations are the ability to act, to manipulate information in your head. That's what an operation is. And the pre-operational stage, notice that it's in the word. Pre-operational means that you aren't really ready to manipulate information in your head yet. You can remember stuff, but you can't really do anything with it. So what you see is what you get. And you often find kids will look at things and see them as being real, even if they're not real. They see their dolls as being alive. They see their dolls as having personalities. You see your stuffed animals as having feelings. You find this very often with preschool-aged kids, and it's known as animism. They'll talk to their babies, they tuck them in, they dress them. We took our daughter to Europe. She had to bring like 4 dolls with her because they couldn't be left alone or they would die. We were like, leave them with grandma. She's like, they don't know grandma as well. They're going to be freaking out. It's like, oh my God, they're pieces of plastic. But that's not how she saw them. She saw them as real. Because kids generally in this stage, what they see is what they get. They can be terrified of things like showing a kid of this age a scary movie and then trying to tell them that it wasn't real. Doesn't work. They will freak out. So you got to be really careful with what you expose these kids to. So their thinking is pretty illogical, not really systematic. They don't really manipulate information in their heads. So this is just kind of a list. Animism, what you see is what you get. Egocentrism, they tend to think that their view of the world is what everybody sees. So they just don't have a big enough memory capacity to take into consideration things like what I see isn't real, or other people might have a different perception of this. The 5 to 7 shift corresponds with what Piaget noticed, that around 5 to 7 years old, kids shift out of this pre-operational thinking to concrete operational thinking. And it generally corresponds to when kids start formal education in a lot of different countries. So concrete operations is the ability to manipulate information in your head. It is sort of between that childlike thinking and adult-like thinking, and it corresponds with an increase in memory capacities and allows kids to make these comparisons that help them categorize. So an example is, your typical 3-year-old just thinks of food as food, and your typical 7-year-old thinks of food in being in these different categories. There's vegetables I like and there's vegetables I hate. If you think about it, that requires increased memory capacity to sort of hold in mind at once both vegetables you like and vegetables you don't like. So it is a kind of memory capacity thing that is tied to your biological development, according to Piaget. So these are things that your concrete operational kid can do. They can reverse operations in their head. So if you pour water from a tall, skinny glass into a short, fat glass, in their head, kids know that if you were to pour it back into the tall, skinny glass, it would look the same as it did before you poured it into the short, fatter glass. So these are examples of things that kids can do in their heads once they reach the concrete operational thinking stage. I'm skipping. And the last stage was formal operations, which Piaget thought was adult-like thinking, and this involves the ability to do abstract thought, to really think about things that don't necessarily exist, but you can still imagine what it would be like. So if I said to you, imagine what the world would be like if there were no cars in it. And you could imagine that, right? And you could think about, well, what would the alternative look like? You ask your typical 7-year-old, and they might say things like, that's stupid, there are cars in it. They're tied to the concrete. Formal operations frees you from the concrete physical world and allows you to think about things that don't necessarily exist, like 3x. If you give a kid a 3x problem, you better explain what that x is or they won't go with you. If you give an adolescent this problem, they are willing to accept that x is not yet known, but we can figure it out. So that's the difference. Okay. That's enough. And I hope that was helpful.